Settle in with a cup of tea and your imagination. This is Detective Duo, where every clue finds its place, just as Tommy and Tuppence would have insisted. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where in the world you're joining from. Tuppence Beresford had just settled at the kitchen table with the Morning Post when the day decided to take a sharp, inconvenient turn. It was supposed to be an ordinary sorting session. Invoices, circulars, a letter from Aunt Griselda she meant to dread later, and a thin blue envelope from a charity that always struck her as unreasonably optimistic. She slit that one open first, merely because it was on top. What fell out was not a donation leaflet. A small brown sheet of brittle paper drifted onto the table, with the delicate finality of a leaf falling from a tree. Tuppence frowned and pulled it closer. The texture was unmistakably old, almost parchment-like. The typing was faint, the ink thinning with age, and at the top was a line that stopped her breath for a moment. Whomever finds this, Mary Jordan did not die naturally. "Tommy!" she called, in the tone of someone who has just found either a body or a scandal. From the sitting room, where he was entangled in the newspaper crossword, Tommy answered, "If it's that new catalogue promising miracle jam pots again, I refuse, absolutely refuse, to be involved." "Come here immediately," Tuppence demanded. Tommy entered, pencil behind his ear, domestic tranquility written all over him. That tranquility did not survive more than half a second as Tuppence thrust the paper into his hands. He read the first line, blinked, then read it again. "Good Lord," he murmured. "Well, that's strange." "Strange?" Tuppence's eyebrows shot upward. "It's chilling, and it fell out of a modern charity envelope. Someone stuffed this in by accident, or someone wanted it delivered." Tommy sat, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Could be a prank, a theatrical note that escaped its troop. Tuppence tapped the paper sharply. "That is not a prank typeface. That is a 1930s typewriter, and it is absolutely genuine in tone. Look." She snatched it back, scanning the rest. "I write this knowing they intend to silence me. If justice is ever to be done, if the child is to be safe when grown, the truth must be known. Mary Jordan did not die naturally." Tommy exhaled in a slow, thoughtful way that meant he was no longer dismissing anything. "Who's Mary Jordan?" "I don't know, not yet." Tuppence had already risen and begun sorting through a makeshift pile of newspapers, clippings, and half-forgotten recipes. "But that name rings faint bells. Now, where did I put that old Gazette?" Tommy glanced again at the note. Could it have been slipped into the wrong envelope at the charity headquarters? If so, it was one spectacularly targeted accident, Tuppence replied. "Of all the households in England, we get the envelope that contains a 40-year-old cry for help. No, Tommy. No. Something is off." She found the Gazette with a triumphant grunt and flipped it open. It wasn't today's edition, but an old one she'd saved for its gardening article, though she couldn't now remember why. She scanned the obituaries page. Mary Jordan. Mary Jordan. Not here. But I've definitely read that name. Tommy, meanwhile, was studying the letter's physical qualities. The paper's degraded. It's several decades old. And the typing's inconsistent. Look, the O is faint, probably from a worn key. This was typed in haste. "Haste and fear," Tuppence said. "Look how the spacing wobbles. Whoever wrote this was frightened." "And they mention a village," Tommy added, reading further. "In Sutton Chancellor, the truth is buried. Tell the child, now grown, what was done." Tuppence froze. Sutton Chancellor. Yes, that was it. She rummaged again through her stack of papers and finally pulled out another tattered clipping. Here, this was years ago, a small piece about an estate auction. It mentioned the death of a Mary Jordan, a governess, who died of a respiratory infection. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Respiratory infection in the 1910s could be influenza. Or, Tuppence said, it could be what someone wanted recorded. Tommy leaned back, crossing his arms. "So, to summarize, we have a brittle anonymous letter claiming a murder, referencing a child who is now grown, and directing us to some long-buried truth in Sutton Chancellor. And all this falls into our lap because of a misdirected envelope." "Exactly," Tuppence replied, "and unless we are to pretend we are blind and staggeringly unimaginative, we must follow this up." Tommy chuckled. It is remarkable how quickly your morning tea can transform into a full investigation. Call it talent, Tuppence said briskly. Besides, don't you feel it? That disturbance, as though the house knows something is wrong. She wasn't wrong. The laurels, usually bustling with the gentle clatter of their domestic chaos, felt unusually still. The ticking clock on the mantelpiece was too loud, the kettle's soft hiss too sharp. Something about the old letter had pierced the morning like a cold draught. Tuppence lowered her voice. Tommy, this wasn't meant to disappear. Whoever wrote it hoped someone, someday, would find it. And if fate placed it in my hands, I absolutely refused to insult fate by ignoring it. Tommy could never resist that spark in her eyes, the spark that had led them through wars, spy hunting, missing persons, jewel thefts, and all manner of chaos. He sighed with resigned affection. Very well, but we will proceed sensibly. When have we ever not? Tuppence shot back. Tommy opened his mouth, paused, then wisely left the point unchallenged. She returned to the letter. Look, here, near the bottom. They believe the matter settled. They are wrong. The child will one day return. The truth must be told. Tommy frowned. Which child? That, Tuppence said, is what we must find out. She moved around the room with sudden purpose, gathering a notebook, a small magnifying glass, and her handbag, all essentials as far as she was concerned. Tommy watched with amusement as she transformed from domestic wife to full investigative force. Before we run off to Sutton Chancellor, Tommy said, shouldn't we establish whether this Mary Jordan actually existed? Tuppence gave him a look of benign pity. Tommy dear, if there is one thing I trust in life, it is my own memory. I read about her, and I intend to find that article. Thus began an energetic rummaging through every drawer in the sitting room, punctuated by Tuppence muttering things like absurd system and should reorganize some day. Tommy joined in reluctantly, fearing for the furniture's safety. Finally, aha, Tuppence cried, brandishing a yellowed clipping. Here, Mary Jordan, governess at Blackthorn Estate, died suddenly in 1915. It was tiny, no cause of death listed, but she was only in her early 30s. Tommy leaned over her shoulder. Sudden death of a young woman. Conveniently vague. Exactly. Tuppence's tone sharpened. Which means we are going. When? Immediately. Tommy blinked. Well, yes, of course, but... Oh, do stop blinking, Tuppence said impatiently, already heading for the hallway. Pack lightly. We can take the afternoon train. Tommy glanced around their scattered sitting room, and then at the letter lying quietly on the kitchen table, its message stark and unwavering. Mary Jordan did not die naturally. A chill, not of weather, but of narrative, ran through him. The old mystery had pushed its way into their peaceful life, and once the story had found them, there was no turning it away. He folded the letter carefully. Very well, Tuppence. Sutton Chancellor it is. And with that, the wrong letter, delivered to the right woman, set the Beresfords on the trail of a truth that had waited 40 years to be heard. Tuppence's first remark upon stepping off the train was not about the scenery, nor the temperature, nor even the stiffness in her left shoe. It's too tidy, she declared. Tommy, who had always believed tidiness a virtue, blinked. Too tidy? Yes, look at it. She swept a hand toward the postcard-perfect lane that led into Sutton Chancellor. The cobblestones were old but scrubbed clean. The cottages looked as if they'd been arranged by a fussy curator rather than built by generations of villagers. Even the hedges seemed trimmed by someone with a compulsion for exact symmetry. This, Tuppence said, is the sort of village that has secrets neatly ironed and locked in drawers. Tommy adjusted their luggage and offered a mild, "Excellent. Perhaps the drawers will be labelled." They set off down the narrow street, their cover story rehearsed but untested. Tommy, ever the optimist, felt it would go smoothly. Tuppence, ever the realist, felt they might be chased out with broomsticks. Between them, balance was achieved. Their first stop was the village tea shop, the Tansy Leaf, which appeared comforting enough. Warm wooden booths, lace curtains, and a chalkboard promising proper scones. The bell chimed pleasantly as they entered. Behind the counter stood a young waitress with soft brown hair pinned back by a ribbon. She greeted them cheerfully, until Tuppence, in an offhand manner she had honed to an art, mentioned that they were researching local history for a potential booklet. Local history? the girl echoed with a flicker of hesitation. Oh, lovely. Yes, the village has loads of it. We're particularly interested in figures connected to the Blackthorn estate, Tommy added casually, removing his hat. Governesses, staff, that sort of thing. At that, the girl's grip on her teaspoon faltered. It fell, clattering against the tile with a bright metallic sting. She flushed. Sorry, I don't know what, slipped right out of my hand. Tuppence's eyes narrowed just slightly. Perfectly all right, my dear. We all have our moments. They selected a booth, and Tommy leaned in. Reaction number 1. Tuppence, without looking up from her handbag, murmured, Certainly not the last. And their tea arrived along with a selection of buttery pastries, which Tommy eyed suspiciously, as though fearing they might disappear if he blinked too long. Tuppence, however, was focused on the patrons. An elderly man seated near the window reading a newspaper happened to glance their way. The moment Tuppence let slip the phrase Mary Jordan, his expression shifted. It was not overt, but it was there, a fractional tightening around the mouth, a pause in the fold of his paper. Then he folded it abruptly, rose, and left without finishing his tea. Reaction number 2, Tommy murmured. I'd say that was more like reaction 2.5, Tuppence replied. He was already thinking of rushing away. I merely accelerated the process. Their waitress returned with a plate of shortbread and attempted a brave smile. Tuppence gave her an encouraging one in return. My husband and I, she said lightly, are researching governesses of the early 20th century. One of them, Mary Jordan, worked at Blackthorn Estate. You wouldn't have heard the name, would you? The girl shook her head too quickly, far too quickly. No, never. Sorry. No need to be sorry, Tuppence said brightly. It's quite an old case. But as the girl hurried back to the counter, she cast one more glance over her shoulder, an anxious glance. Tuppence's expression sharpened like a blade. They are absolutely hiding something. Or, Tommy said, the village simply has an aversion to governesses. Don't be absurd. No one is afraid of governesses unless the governess has uncovered something very inconvenient. They paid and left the shop, resuming their slow stroll through Sutton Chancellor. Outside, the villagers they passed smiled with a strain that was too polished to be natural. A pair of women lowered their voices as the Beresfords approached. A boy who had been skipping stones in a puddle suddenly ran indoors as if threatened by rain. Tommy observed with mild amusement. My dear, we are becoming quite the sensation. Not us, the words were asking about. They reached the crossroads where the village map stood. Tuppence inspected it with theatrical absent-mindedness, while her eyes darted for eavesdroppers. There it is, Tommy said, pointing. Blackthorn Estate, north of the village, a long private road apparently. And very little foot traffic, Tuppence noted, which is suspicious all on its own. As they continued along the lane, a man tending his garden paused mid-hoe. He gave them a stiff nod. Tommy greeted him politely. We're doing a small research project on village history, he said. Tommy Carter, this is my wife, Prudence. Have you lived here long? The man grunted affirmatively. Tuppence smiled sweetly. You wouldn't happen to know anything about the Llewellyn family? Governesses? Old staff? Mary Jordan, perhaps? The man visibly recoiled, not dramatically, but with a slight twitch in the jaw, as though he had bitten into a lemon. No idea, he said curtly, and returned to hacking at soil with unnecessary aggression. Reaction number 3, Tommy said as they moved on. And definitely the most horticulturally expressive, Tuppence replied. They reached a small green where schoolchildren were filing out of a modest stone building. A mother pushing a pram nodded at them before whispering to another parent. Tuppence caught the word strangers, then another word, estate. Tommy shrugged. Our cover story works. Too well, perhaps. Indeed, Tuppence murmured. They think we're historians. If they thought we were detectives, half of them would faint. They circled the green until finally approaching a man in his 70s feeding crumbs to birds. He seemed the sort who enjoyed gossip if fed at the proper pace. Lovely morning, Tommy began. The man grunted, scattering crumbs. We're researching the estate, Tuppence said, particularly anyone who worked there. I believe a Mary Jordan did many years back. The man's hand paused mid-air. The crumbs fell in a strange, uneven shower. Oh, her, he muttered. Busybody she was, too clever by half, always poking her nose where it didn't belong. Tuppence's tone snapped to bright interest. Indeed. And what was she poking into? The man stiffened. Didn't say that. You implied it, she responded pleasantly. He turned his back. I've said enough. A red herring if I've ever smelled one, Tuppence murmured as they walked away. Not necessarily, Tommy replied. Could be genuine resentment. Tuppence shook her head. That man doesn't resent Mary Jordan. He fears the memory of her. Their final stop of the day was the village library, a small brick structure beside the church. The librarian, a thin figure with spectacles magnifying already nervous eyes, tried to avoid conversation entirely, but Tuppence was persistent. Within 10 minutes they learned that Mary Jordan had been a governess to a young Anthony Llewellyn, that she'd been described as bright, gentle, inquisitive, and that her death had been quite sad and mercifully quick. And she died of, Tuppence asked. The librarian swallowed. Respiratory infection. Of course she did, Tuppence murmured. And you? Did you know her? No, the librarian said too quickly. No, far before my time. Tuppence smiled politely. Thank you. Outside, Tommy exhaled. Well, we've learned that the village is either allergic to direct answers or united in a conspiracy of awkwardness. We've learned much more, Tuppence said. We've learned that Mary Jordan was clever, well-liked, and abruptly removed from memory. And that, Tommy darling, is the definition of a cover-up. They paused at the crest of the lane overlooking Sutton Chancellor. Its prettiness had not faded, but now they could see the tension beneath the surface, taut as a string. Tomorrow, Tuppence said, we visit the Blackthorn estate. And what do we expect to find? Tuppence clasped her handbag. Secrets that never wanted visitors. The front gates of Blackthorn estate did not creak open so much as reluctantly surrender. The iron bars, overgrown with ivy, parted just wide enough for Tommy to guide Tuppence through. I do hope our little history project isn't about to earn us a lifetime ban, he murmured. Tommy dear, Tuppence replied briskly, if one lets signs that say, private, stop one never gets anything interesting done. The path wound upward through dense trees before revealing the manor, a sprawling structure whose windows were dimmed under years of dust. It was grand in that slightly exhausted way old houses had, like a former beauty queen forced to attend a reunion she did not wish to remember. Waiting for them was Mrs. Childers, the estate's sole housekeeper, her posture prim as a pressed collar. You may look around, she said, hands clasped tightly, but only the public rooms. Mr. Anthony doesn't like strangers wandering about. Of course not, Tuppence said, with earnestness she absolutely did not feel. Mrs. Childers led them inside. The entrance hall greeted them with the faint scent of cold stone and old lavender. White dust sheets draped the furniture, giving the impression of tall, shapeless spirits keeping vigil. Yet Tuppence noted something inconsistent. The corners of the hall table gleamed faintly, as though someone had polished them with fresh zeal. Odd, she whispered. Some things have been tended, and others left to sleep, Tommy finished. Mrs. Childers offered an anxious smile. I dust what Mr. Anthony permits. He prefers the house as it was. A museum of memories, Tommy murmured. Their tour began with the drawing room. Dust lay thick on the carpet, but the mantel clock ticked, slowly but undeniably alive. Tuppence paused. You wind this, Mrs. Childers? No, madam, it winds itself. A clock in a house with no recent visitors, Tuppence murmured thoughtfully. Next came the dining room, equally shrouded in faded linen. The long table was set with plates beneath sheets, an odd formality for a room rarely used. It was Mrs. Llewellyn's rule, the housekeeper said. The table is never to be cleared. Even now? Tommy asked. Mrs. Childers nodded once. Even now. Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. Fascinating ritual. They crossed into a hallway lined with portraits. A stern woman with a high collar glared from the largest frame. Mrs. Llewellyn, Mrs. Childers said. Anthony's mother. She had expectations. Yes, Tuppence said softly. I imagine she did. As they ascended the staircase, Tuppence brushed her fingers against the banister. It was warm, not from sunlight, but from recent touch. Someone had passed this way not long before. At the top, Mrs. Childers hesitated. The schoolroom is this way, but it hasn't been touched in years. Tuppence smiled. We'd love to see it. The schoolroom was the kind of space that breathed childhood even after decades. Rows of small wooden desks, an old map curled at the edges, a chalkboard still bearing faint mathematical scribbles long since erased. A child's slate lay on one of the desks, a stub of chalk beside it. But the eeriest thing was the photograph on the wall. It was faded but intact. Mary Jordan seated beside a young boy of perhaps 8. Mary was neat, composed, dignified. The boy, Anthony Llewellyn, wore a stiff collar and an expression that mixed boredom with fear. Someone had violently scratched Mary Jordan's face, the damage deep enough to tear the paper. "My word," Tuppence breathed. Mrs. Childers stiffened. "I don't know who did that." Tommy approached the photo, leaning close. A deliberate mutilation. Not the work of time or moths. "No," Tuppence said. "Someone hated Mary." Tommy's eye caught the bookshelf next. "May I?" Mrs. Childers nodded reluctantly. The shelves were filled with children's books, primers and atlases. Tommy ran his hand along the spines until he stopped at an old geography book. Thick, slightly crooked, and oddly heavier on one side. He pulled it out. The pages had been cut away in the centre, creating a hollow space. Inside lay a single object, a metal button, tarnished but still bearing its design, a small insignia of military origin. "A soldier's button," Tommy said. "Though not recent. Pre-war, perhaps." Mrs. Childers looked uneasy. "I've never seen that before." Tuppence took the button, weighing it in her palm. Mary must have hidden it here. But why? And whose uniform did it come from? Tommy glanced around. Someone in the house had ties to the military, or someone who wanted others to believe so. Tuppence nodded. "A clue placed with care." Mrs. Childers shifted. "I shouldn't allow rummaging." Tuppence smiled apologetically. "Forgive us. It's just terribly interesting." Before Mrs. Childers could respond, a sound echoed from the floor below, a door slamming. Mrs. Childers paled. "Mr. Anthony must be home." A prickle of tension slid through Tuppence. "Unexpected?" "He doesn't usually return at this hour." They descended. At the foot of the stairs stood Anthony Llewellyn, or rather, what appeared to be the ghost of the stiff-faced boy from the photograph, now grown into a thin, pale man. His eyes flickered with quick, restless suspicion. "What," he demanded, "are you doing in my house?" Tommy stepped forward with calming courtesy. "We're writing a local history pamphlet. Mrs. Childers was kind enough to show us." "I did not permit it," Anthony snapped. His gaze darted between them, then back to the schoolroom door behind them. "You've been up there." Tuppence offered her brightest, most disarming smile. "We were admiring the architecture." Anthony gave a sharp, humourless laugh. "Architecture? That room is not for display." He stalked past them with agitated strides, entering the schoolroom. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a glance and followed cautiously to the threshold. Anthony looked around the room with a wild, wounded expression. "She ruined everything," he muttered. "Always interfering, always judging, always—" "Mary Jordan?" Tuppence asked softly. He spun, eyes narrowing. "You know her name." "Only recently. She was your governess, was she not?" Anthony's hands clenched. "She was nothing. She was a nuisance, a liar, a poison." Tuppence stepped closer, not boldly but gently, as though speaking to a frightened animal. "Someone scratched out her face in that photograph." Anthony's gaze flicked toward it, then away. "It wasn't me." "Then who?" He shook his head violently. "I told you, she meddled. She made everyone think things that weren't true." "And what was she investigating?" Tuppence asked. Anthony's eyes darted again, to the desk on the far side of the room. A large desk, its drawers locked. On top sat an old typewriter, dust-coated but unmistakably of the era used to write the mysterious letter Tuppence still carried in her handbag. She felt her breath catch. "That typewriter," she said lightly. "An heirloom?" "No one touches it," Anthony said sharply. "No one." His voice cracked on the last word. "You've seen enough. Leave." His abruptness was not simple rudeness. It was fear stitched into temper. Tommy touched Tuppence's arm, signalling retreat. "We apologize for intruding." Anthony stood rigid, fists trembling. "If you come back, I'll have you removed." Mrs. Childers hovered nearby, wringing her hands. I'll show you out. Outside, the air felt fresher, less compressed by memory. Tuppence turned to Tommy the moment the door shut. Tommy, that typewriter, did you see it? Same make, same model. I saw, Tommy said softly. Someone is using that house, carefully, selectively. Some rooms frozen in time, others recently disturbed. Tommy nodded. Mary Jordan wasn't simply a governess. She was uncovering something, Tuppence finished, and someone in that house still fears what she found. They walked down the long drive, the estate looming behind them like a watcher who refused to die. Tuppence began the morning by making an enemy. All she had done was ask a perfectly innocent question, at least innocent by her standards. Mrs. Fanshawe, the vicar's wife, had been arranging hymn sheets in the church hall when Tuppence approached her with a bright smile and a notebook poised for jotting. Mrs. Fanshawe, may I trouble you for a moment? I'm collecting oral histories of Sutton Chancellor. I wondered if you might share anything about Mary Jordan. The hymn sheets fluttered from Mrs. Fanshawe's hands, as though jolted by a gust of wind, though the air was still. Mary Jordan? Mrs. Fanshawe repeated, her voice stiffening like starch. No need to revisit that old sorrow. She passed peacefully as one could. Tuppence tilted her head. Peacefully? Of course. But as governess to the Llewellyn boy, she must have been a familiar village figure. Perhaps someone recalled her. Not to my knowledge. Mrs. Fanshawe gathered the hymn sheets in stiff, jerky motions, and there is no benefit, none at all, in stirring up stories from that unhappy year. Tuppence smiled as though she agreed wholeheartedly. Naturally. Still, I'm fascinated by governesses of past eras. Their lives were quite varied, don't you think? Mrs. Fanshawe's eyes narrowed in a way that suggested the conversation was a door, and she was about to slam it shut. Mrs. Carter, she said curtly, Mary Jordan died in her sleep after a brief illness. That is all anyone need know. And with that, she whisked away, carrying the hymn sheets like a shield. Tommy had been waiting at the church gate. Well, he asked. Well, Tuppence replied, she lied before she finished her first sentence, and she fled before she finished her second. Promising, Tommy said cheerfully. They moved on. Sutton Chancellor had developed a peculiar atmosphere since their arrival. It was a place where curtains twitched at odd moments, conversations halted when the Beresfords approached, and every villager behaved as though accidentally revealing a secret might cause the earth to swallow them whole. Tommy's next stop was Mr. Copley, the estate gardener, who was bent over a row of shrubs with disciplined intensity. He looked as though he had been born pruning something. "Good morning," Tommy called pleasantly. Mr. Copley grunted. "I'm gathering a bit of information on Blackthorn Estate," Tommy said. "Figures who worked there through the years. One name that came up is Mary Jordan. You may recall her?" The gardener straightened, blinking owlishly. "No, never heard of her." Tommy's gaze drifted to the tools on the ground. The pruning shears gleamed, modern and well-oiled. A stack of new twine and a packet of sharp, unused stakes lay beside them. "You've been at the estate long?" Tommy asked conversationally. "Most of my life," Mr. Copley resumed cutting. "Never knew the governess? She would have been here when you were a lad." "No recollection," the gardener said. Tommy noticed his jaw tighten. "Interesting," Tommy murmured. "Well, thank you." As they walked away, Tuppence whispered, "He's lying." "Of course," Tommy replied. "The man has newer tools than the average London shop. He remembers everything that has happened on that estate." "And is determined to remember nothing," Tuppence finished. Her next move was cleverer. While Tommy questioned stubborn old men, Tuppence drifted toward the school where young mothers gathered in clusters, prams parked against the wall like a line of small, waiting soldiers. Children ran about, shrieking joyfully. Tuppence approached a mother who seemed least wary. Soft features, warm smile, a toddler clutching her skirt. "Lovely child," Tuppence said. "Do you teach here?" "Oh, no," the mother laughed. "My Emily's far too little, but we come every week for the sing-along hour." Within moments, Tuppence was seated among them, chatting comfortably, blending in like a natural busybody. She learned about the village fete, the headmaster's fondness for terrible puns, and the school's chronic shortage of chalk. Only when the conversation turned to phone calls did something peculiar happen. "Honestly," one mother said, rolling her eyes, The school phone rings at the strangest hours these days. Last week it was nearly 7 in the evening. Another mother nodded fiercely. Yes, and half the time it's that Llewellyn man, Anthony, always asking after children who aren't even enrolled anymore, or about staff who retired decades ago. Very odd, the first agreed, but I suppose he's lonely. Tuppence's ears pricked. Asking after children, she repeated gently. What sort of questions? Oh, nothing alarming, just strange. Who's in what class? Which children come from which families? Who's related to whom? That sort of thing. Tuppence tucked this away carefully. A red herring, perhaps, but troubling nonetheless. She thanked the mothers and rejoined Tommy near the village green. What did you discover? He asked. That Anthony Llewellyn telephones the school obsessively, Tuppence said. Possibly harmless, possibly not. There's quite a spectrum between those, Tommy said dryly. That afternoon they entered the pub, a modest establishment with wooden beams and the faint scent of hops. A chalkboard announced the special of the day, shepherd's pie, if cook hasn't burnt it. Tommy approached an elderly man nursing a pint with military neatness. Colonel Hemsworth wore a moustache that could have commanded troops on its own. Tommy saluted him with a nod. Forgive me, Tommy Carter. I'm looking into the old Blackthorn estate. The colonel grunted. Never cared for the place. Too many whispered quarrels, even in its heyday. Ah, Tommy said lightly. We heard Mary Jordan once caused a bit of a stir here. The colonel stiffened. Where did you hear that? Passing mention, Tommy said. The colonel took a long drink. She confronted someone, he said, voice lowering, right in the square. Caused quite the spectacle. Shouldn't have. Foolish girl. Foolish, but brave. Too brave. Who did she confront? Not my business to repeat. Colonel, it rather is. No. He set down his glass with finality. Because the person she confronted is still alive. Tommy tried again, but the colonel turned away, shutting down the line of inquiry entirely. Fascinating, Tuppence murmured when Tommy relayed the exchange. Someone Mary confronted is still here, still watching us. Still afraid, Tommy added. The sun was beginning to dip when Tuppence made her next move. She insisted they return to the church, not for prayer, but for paperwork. The vicar's study smelled of ink and old leather-bound volumes. The vicar, a gentleman with the disposition of an apologetic shepherd, welcomed them politely. We're compiling village records, Tuppence said, producing her most scholarly tone. Might we view parish registers from the early 1900s? Deaths, births, staff rosters, anything general. Oh, certainly, he said, pulling a heavy ledger from a cabinet. Some years are incomplete, I'm afraid. Tuppence took the book, flipped to the section around 1915, then stilled. Whole pages were gone, not torn crudely, but neatly, precisely, removed, leaving only the faintest remains where the binding held their ghosts. Curious, Tommy murmured. Were records for this year damaged? The vicar frowned. No, at least I don't believe so. I hadn't noticed pages missing. Tuppence gently touched the bare threads. These aren't accidentally lost. Someone cut them out. Records of births, records of deaths, servants hired or dismissed. Everything from the year Mary Jordan died, vanished. Tommy closed the ledger softly. Someone, he said, is curating history. Tuppence met his eyes, and doing a very thorough job. They left the church in silence, the village around them too still, too polished, too watchful. Finally, Tuppence said quietly, Sutton Chancellor isn't merely forgetful. It is guarding a memory with claws and teeth. The first sign that the jumble sale would be fruitful was the expression on Tuppence's face, an expression that meant she had detected something promising, suspicious, or deliciously scandalous. The universe, she declared as she swept into the church hall, has a habit of leaving answers in untidy cardboard boxes. Tommy glanced around the chaotic sprawl of donated bric-a-brac, and also moth-eaten shawls, chipped china, and at least 3 lamps that should be sentenced to death. That, Tuppence replied, is the joy of the hunt. She drifted like a determined hawk toward the corner where volunteers had stacked old books and paper goods. A large cardboard box sat beneath the table, half crushed, labelled in smudged pencil, Old Village Photos. Tommy, she said solemnly, this box has called to me. It looks like it's calling for medical attention, he muttered, but he crouched beside her anyway. Tuppence plunged her hands into the box with all the reverence of an archaeologist and began pulling out brittle sepia portraits, faded family gatherings, a school group from the 1890s, and one extremely stern-looking cow. "Charming," she murmured, flipping through, "but not scandalous." Until, "Oh," her voice dropped an octave. "Oh, Tommy, look." She held up a photograph, larger than the others and more candid. The edges were curling, the surface faintly scratched, but the image was clear. Mary Jordan stood at the wrought-iron gate of Blackthorn Estate, recognizably her from the face in the scratched-over schoolroom portrait. Here, though, she was alive, vibrant, mid-sentence, and someone stood opposite her. An adult, back partly turned toward the camera, posture rigid, one hand raised in what appeared to be an urgent or warning gesture. The face was hidden entirely, but the tension between them almost vibrated off the paper. Tommy took the photograph, angling it toward the light. This was taken in haste from a distance, a candid shot. Someone was documenting that encounter. "Just before her death," Tuppence whispered. "This is from the same week." "How do you know?" "The hairstyle, her brooch, the date of the fate banner in the background. Look, just there, faintly." Tommy blinked. "You astound me." Yes, but focus," she said impatiently. "This proves Mary Jordan wasn't merely interfering. She was confronting someone." "And someone didn't want this moment preserved," Tommy added. "Which begs the question, why is it in a jumble sale box?" Tuppence raised her eyebrows pointedly. "Precisely why we must find out." Before Tommy could answer, a volunteer approached, a kindly woman in an apron. "Oh, digging through the photo box, are you?" she said cheerfully. "Most of those were donated last month." "Last month?" Tuppence repeated, her tone sharpening like a needle. "All of them?" "Yes. Someone dropped it at the door early one morning. Didn't leave a name." Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a silent, electrified glance. The donor had wanted the photos gone, and recently. Tommy cleared his throat. "We'd like to purchase this one." "Oh, you may keep anything in that box," the volunteer said breezily. "Most people don't have the patience to sift through." Tuppence almost hugged her. They stepped aside to examine the photograph more closely. Tommy turned it slowly, studying the shadows. "Tuppence, look. The shadows fall left to right, but the gate latch is on the wrong side. This image is reversed." "Reversed? As in printed from a damaged negative?" "Exactly. Someone copied it. Maybe secretly, maybe to preserve the evidence." Tuppence's pulse quickened. "Or to keep it from being destroyed." Orders for coffee arrived at the makeshift refreshment stall behind them, punctuated by clinking cups and the hum of cheerful village chatter, none of which softened Tuppence's new determination. "We need reactions," she said. "Quick, unfiltered ones. Let's ask around." Tommy, wisely, held the photograph at half-mast, letting Tuppence lead the charge. The first villager they approached, a middle-aged woman selling knitted pot-holders, took one look, paled, and shook her head vigorously. No, mislabeled. That can't be Mary Jordan. Wrong dress, wrong posture." "She looks quite like Mary Jordan," Tuppence said sweetly. "No, dear, absolutely not. Wrong, just wrong." She then busied herself reorganizing already straight piles of pot-holders. "That," Tuppence said under her breath, was a terrified attempt at improvisation. Next they approached the elderly man who had fled the tea shop earlier in the week. Upon seeing the photograph, he froze mid-step. "No," he said, "no, shouldn't exist. You don't show that around." "Why ever not?" Tuppence asked innocently. "Because it'll stir trouble. Old trouble." But he would say nothing more. The schoolmistress, Miss Elowen Pierce, was found manning a table of children's books. Tuppence approached her with a polite greeting. "We found an old photograph," she said, offering it forward, "from the estate. Perhaps you recognize the individuals?" Miss Pierce glanced down, inhaled sharply, then snatched the photo from Tuppence's hand with astonishing speed. "Where did you get this?" Her voice trembled. "This shouldn't be. Oh, for heaven's sake." She disappeared behind her table, opened a drawer and locked the photograph inside. "That," Tuppence said, hands on hips, "is not yours." "It shouldn't have been out," Miss Pierce insisted, breathless. "You mustn't show it. You don't understand what trouble this could cause." "We're eager to understand," Tuppence replied sharply. But Miss Pierce folded her arms like a fortress. "No," she said, "let it lie." Tommy stepped forward. "Miss Pierce, someone donated that box last month. Do you know who?" She looked away. "No." Tuppence leaned closer. "Someone wanted this photo hidden, and you've just confirmed you know why." Miss Pierce stiffened. "Please leave." Her tone, brittle and final, silenced further inquiry, but the reaction had been loud enough. Back outside, Tuppence let out an exasperated sigh loud enough to startle a passing pigeon. "Tommy, I swear, if one more villager tells me to stop asking questions, I shall start asking them twice as loudly." Tommy patted her arm. "Steady, old thing. Losing your temper in a village like this only makes them tighten the shutters." "My temper is perfectly intact," Tuppence said, though her pacing contradicted the claim. "It's merely simmering briskly." Tommy produced his notebook. "We need to jot down everything, every twitch and tremor." Tuppence recited with clipped precision: Villager 1 denies reality. Villager 2, panic and retreat. Miss Pierce, borderline hysteria and unlawful photo confiscation. "And the shadow reversal," Tommy added, "which suggests a copied negative, likely done by the photographer or someone who feared it would be destroyed." "And the anonymous donation last month," Tuppence said. "That timing is too suggestive." Tommy nodded. Someone's conscience flared. "Or someone feared discovery," Tuppence said darkly. They found a quiet bench near the green. Tuppence unfolded the problem like a map. Mary Jordan was in a confrontation. Whoever she confronted is dangerous, either then or now. Someone photographed it. Someone kept it for decades. And now, someone wants it out of their hands. "Or wants it found," Tommy said. Tuppence paused. "If that's true, it could be a warning, or a message, or a breadcrumb." Tommy considered. "Let's list those who reacted most strongly." "Anthony Llewellyn," Tuppence said immediately. "He has a violent aversion to her memory." "Colonel Hemsworth," Tommy added. "He knows something about a village square confrontation." "Mrs. Fanshawe," Tuppence said. "Overly controlling, too polished, and her reaction was theatrical." "And Miss Pierce," Tommy said, "who nearly collapsed when she saw this image." Tuppence nodded. 4 strong suspects with 4 distinct motives. And now, with this photograph, we know Mary Jordan was not passively involved. She was driven. She sought someone out. The late afternoon activity around them hummed softly. The clatter of a dropped tray, the murmur of villagers exchanging coins for trinkets, the distant laughter of children, all perfectly ordinary. But inside that photograph, preserved in its frozen moment, was something that was not ordinary at all. Something volatile. Something suppressed. Tuppence stood abruptly, fire lighting her eyes. This image is the key. It proves Mary Jordan wasn't wandering harmlessly. She was confronting the truth. And the truth, Tommy said with a small smile, tends to make enemies. "Then let's find out," Tuppence replied, "which enemy confronted her at the gate." They walked away from the jumble sale, the village around them feeling suddenly smaller. Behind them, unbeknownst to either, Miss Pierce watched from the hall doorway, one hand resting protectively on the drawer where the original photograph now lay hidden. The trouble began with a ledger, not an ominous one, not leather-bound or clasped with brass, but an utterly dull, municipal-looking volume Tommy found stacked lopsidedly on a shelf in the parish office. In fact, it was the unremarkableness of the ledger that made Tuppence immediately suspicious. "Anything that looks this boring," she pronounced, hovering behind him, "is definitely hiding something." Tommy flipped open the book. "Old employee rolls for Blackthorn Estate." He skimmed the page. "Gardener, stable boy, maid, here, footman, Peter Lacey, dismissed abruptly, no reason listed." Tuppence leaned over his shoulder. "Footman dismissed weeks before Mary Jordan died, and nobody's mentioned him." "Probably coincidence." "Tommy, darling," she said sweetly, "the day I believe in coincidences is the day you'll find me quietly knitting in an armchair." Tommy smiled. "Noted." They copied down the name, intending to investigate further, but the moment they stepped into the village lane and uttered the words Peter Lacey, they may as well have cast a spell of immediate discomfort. The butcher tightened his jaw and muttered, "Don't know the man." The postmistress nearly knocked over a stack of letters in her hurry to close the conversation. A young man walking a dog paled, tugging the lead as if afraid the dog might remember something incriminating. Even Mr. Copley, who claimed not to recall Mary Jordan in the slightest, reacted with an unmistakable flinch. Tuppence's eyes gleamed. Aha, everyone remembers him perfectly. Strong reactions, Tommy noted, which means the name is alive, not forgotten. And someone, Tuppence said, wants it dead. Their breakthrough came from Mrs. Brigham, a retired schoolteacher so old she seemed as though she had outlasted time out of sheer stubbornness. She lived in a tiny cottage near the edge of the village, surrounded by rose bushes so wild they appeared to be staging a coup. Mrs. Brigham opened her door only because Tuppence brought jam tarts. "Oh, I shouldn't," Mrs. Brigham said, already taking two. "Come in. Mind the rug. Slips terribly." Tuppence handled the situation with gentle cunning. "We're looking into the history of Sutton Chancellor," she said. "We've come across the name Peter Lacey." Mrs. Brigham froze mid-bite. "Dear old soul," Tuppence murmured, watching her eyes tighten. "You do remember him." Mrs. Brigham sank into her armchair as though lowering herself into memory. "He was a footman, tall as a lamppost, always polite, always in a hurry though, restless, as though something chased him from the inside." "Did he know Mary Jordan?" Tommy asked. "Oh yes," Mrs. Brigham breathed. "More than know. They were seen together often. Quiet chats, walks near the estate, but then—" She hesitated. Tuppence leaned forward. "Please go on." "One day," Mrs. Brigham whispered, "I saw them arguing near the back lane. Furious words. Mary looked fierce, and Peter looked terrified." "Terrified," Tuppence repeated. Mrs. Brigham nodded vigorously. "Not angry. Scared, as though she had cornered him with something he didn't want to hear, or as though he feared for her." "And this was shortly before she died?" Tommy asked. "A few days, and after she died, the village changed, everyone whispered. Then Peter vanished, gone in the night." "Did he speak to anyone before he left?" Tuppence pressed. Mrs. Brigham hesitated again. "He tried to send a telegraph. I happened to see him at the post office, white as a sheet, hands shaking, but he tore up the top half of the form before handing it in. Only the office girl saw the rest." Tuppence nearly leapt to her feet. "We must speak to the office girl." Mrs. Brigham blinked. "My dear, she's 82 now. Lives with her daughter in Cornwall." Tuppence slumped. "Blast." Tommy chuckled. "We'll manage. Mrs. Brigham, thank you. You've been wonderfully helpful." As they stood to leave, Mrs. Brigham added softly, "Mary Jordan knew something dangerous, and Peter Lacey was caught in the middle. That's what I think." Outside, Tuppence exhaled in a sharp rush. "Tommy, this confirms that Mary was investigating something, and someone wanted her quiet." "And someone wanted Peter silent too," Tommy added. They returned to the Blackthorn estate with a sense of purpose sharpened by new information. Mrs. Childers was notably hesitant to allow them entry again, but Tuppence's manner of polite insistence was immovable. "We won't disturb anything," she lied magnificently. Their destination, the schoolroom. It looked the same as before, quiet, abandoned, a frozen memory of a child's world. But Tuppence moved with the instincts of someone who sensed the past whispering beneath the surface. "Mary hid a button in a hollow book," she said, scanning the room. "She hid things, evidence, secrets." Tommy paced behind the teacher's desk. "This piece is large. If I wanted to hide something here—" His foot scuffed an odd patch of wood. Tuppence swooped in. "Move." She knelt beside the desk, tracing along the base with nimble fingers. A tiny metal edge met her touch. "A false latch," she whispered. With deliberate pressure, the panel popped loose, revealing a drawer concealed beneath the main one, lined with dust so fine it looked like grey powder. Inside sat a small notebook. Tuppence lifted it carefully. The cover was worn almost smooth, the spine cracked. "Mary Jordan's," Tommy murmured. They opened it together. The first pages contained neat handwriting, observations about lessons, Antony's progress, notes on what appeared to be normal governess duties. But as they turned further, Mary's writing shifted. The lines became cramped, hurried, underlined as though she'd written in fear or haste. "The child is not safe. Someone has influenced the boy. The inheritance is being twisted. I must act before it is too late." Tuppence's breath caught. "Tommy, she was protecting him." "Or protecting someone from him," Tommy said quietly. They read on. Mary described overheard arguments between Anthony's mother and an unidentified person, someone she called the other. She noted missing items from her room, warnings delivered in whispers, and increasing hostility from unnamed members of the household. Mary wrote, "If I disappear, it will not be illness. If I die, it will not be chance. Someone fears the truth." Tuppence closed her eyes. She knew. Tommy nodded. And she was planning to reveal something. Then came the final page. The handwriting was jagged, the ink uneven. "If they remove me, the truth lies with the one who was never meant to inherit." Tuppence's eyes widened. The one who was never meant to inherit, not Anthony. Another heir? Tommy stepped back, mind racing. Mary Jordan knew about an inheritance dispute, about a hidden heir, or a lost child, or someone stolen from their rightful place. "And someone killed her for it," Tuppence whispered, "and possibly frightened Peter Lacey into fleeing." Tommy's voice was low. "We need to identify who else could have inherited the estate. A sibling, a cousin, a child hidden away." Tuppence tapped the notebook's edge. "The parish records from that year were cut out. Someone erased the proof." "And Mary tried to preserve the truth here," Tommy said, "hidden under the desk." Tuppence clenched the notebook. "Tommy, this is the most important clue yet. Whoever removed Mary Jordan, whoever hid the heir, has been curating the village memory for 40 years. They cut out pages, they hid photos, they erased names. And they left behind a ghost trail," Tommy said, "and we now have the lantern." They stood silently in the schoolroom, surrounded by the stillness of old lessons and lost truths. Finally, Tuppence said softly, "Mary was braver than any governess has a right to be." "And those who silenced her," Tommy replied, "have much to fear." They replaced the false panel, leaving the schoolroom exactly as they'd found it, and stepped out into the corridor, carrying with them the notebook of a woman who had died trying to reveal a secret the village had buried alive. Tuppence stared at Mary Jordan's notebook as though it were a ticking clock. "Tommy," she said at last, her voice tight, "this isn't about a child in danger. It's about a child in hiding, the rightful heir, someone who should have inherited everything and didn't." Tommy regarded her over the rim of his cup. And if Mary tried to set it right, someone silenced her and scared Peter Lacey away. Tuppence began pacing the length of their rented room at the village inn, her mind working at high speed. So Mary discovered that Anthony Llewellyn is not the sole heir, possibly not the heir at all. Tommy nodded. One child publicly acknowledged, but if there was another, then the entire village has been complicit in hiding it, Tuppence finished, and hiding that child's identity. She paused, rubbing her temples. "We have to find out whether there were 2 children born to Mrs. Llewellyn." "Then we begin with someone who might know," Tommy said. "The midwife." They found Mrs. Ellery in a slate-roofed house on the older edge of the village, a house that seemed to sag gently toward the earth, as though tired from holding so many memories. Mrs. Ellery was in her 80s, white-haired, soft-spoken, and nearly swallowed by an enormous knitted shawl. Her eyes, however, were sharp, when they chose to be. Tuppence began with a warm smile and a plate of pastries. "Mrs. Ellery, we're writing a little piece on local births and traditions. You were midwife here for a long time, weren't you?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Ellery breathed. "Brought more than 40 babies into the world. I could tell you some stories." She giggled unexpectedly. "One came out singing. Well, not really singing, but it sounded like it." Tommy eased the conversation along gently. "We're particularly interested in Blackthorn Estate, the Llewellyn family. You were there for Anthony's birth, I believe." Mrs. Ellery's merry expression flickered. Yes, for the birth. Very long labour. Nearly 3 days. The lady was difficult." "And was Anthony healthy?" Tuppence asked. "Yes, fine baby. Screamed beautifully." She chuckled. "Vital sign, that." "And you attended no other births at the estate?" Tommy inquired. Mrs. Ellery hesitated, her fingers stilled on the edge of her shawl. "Well, births blur together after a while." Tuppence leaned closer. "Mrs. Ellery, please, it's important. Was there another child?" Silence. Then the shawl-clad shoulders sagged. "You must understand," Mrs. Ellery said, her voice trembling. "Those were orders. strict ones. The mistress. She was a woman of fierce will, and she did not want people talking. There were twins, Tuppence whispered. Mrs. Ellery closed her eyes, and 2 tears slid down her wrinkled cheeks. Yes, she murmured, 2 boys, 1 strong, 1 weaker. The mistress, she looked at the second child and said, "This one will bring ruin," and she ordered him sent away before sunrise. Tuppence felt the words strike like a blow. Tommy, to his credit, kept his voice steady. "Where was the child sent?" Mrs. Ellery shook her head. "I never knew. A man came in a cart, not from the village. Papers were signed, the baby gone, and the mistress forbade mention of him. Not to the staff, not to the village, not even to the doctor." Tuppence pressed a hand to her heart. "And Mary Jordan discovered it." "Yes," Mrs. Ellery whispered. "Mary was clever, always noticing things. She cared for the boy, Anthony, but she also asked questions. Too many. The mistress said Mary had become inconvenient." "And dangerous," Tommy added softly. Mrs. Ellery nodded. "Yes, I believe Mary was trying to find the other child. She asked me once about a birthmark." Tommy leaned forward. "Birthmark?" "A little shape, like a comma, on the baby's left forearm." Her voice grew firmer, clearer, as though memory sharpened with focus. "The weaker twin had it. I remember because Mary asked me to describe it. She must have thought she had seen it on someone." Tuppence shot Tommy a meaningful look. "Someone," she murmured, "in the village." Mrs. Ellery nodded faintly. "Possibly, but I never saw it again." "And Anthony?" Tommy asked. "Did he know he had a twin?" "Children sense things," Mrs. Ellery whispered, "but if he knew, he never said. Mary tried to help him, I think, but whatever she tried, it cost her." The room fell into careful silence. Finally, Tuppence reached forward, gently placing her hand over Mrs. Ellery's. "Thank you. You've been braver than you realize." Mrs. Ellery swallowed hard, her eyes distant. "Tell the truth," she murmured. "Someone should." Outside, Tuppence drew a deep breath and began pacing the gravel path. "A hidden heir," she whispered. "A twin. A child stolen at birth, and Mary Jordan discovered it." Tommy nodded slowly. "Which means the rightful heir could be anywhere. Working in a shop, a postman, a schoolteacher, living an ordinary life. And never knowing he was born Llewellyn," Tuppence murmured. "My heavens, Tommy, what if he's in the village right now?" Tommy considered this. If the mistress wanted him erased, she might have ensured he was adopted far away, but Mrs. Ellery implied Mary thought she'd seen him nearby. "Which means he came back," Tuppence said, "or never left." Tommy pulled out his notebook. "Left-handed, and with a comma-shaped birthmark. Someone in this village, now grown, fits that description." Tuppence's eyes narrowed with fierce purpose. "Then we will find him." They spent the next several hours drifting through Sutton Chancellor like innocuous observers. Tuppence's eyes scanned sleeves, cuffs, hands, gestures. Tommy watched posture, skin tone, subtle left-handed movements. They found 3 left-handed villagers of the appropriate age. Mr. Calder, the quiet assistant teacher at the school. Mr. Dobson, who worked at the post office. A shopkeeper's son, sorting produce in the corner shop. None showed a visible birthmark on the forearm, though all 3 wore long sleeves, making confirmation impossible. Tuppence grew contemplative. "It feels intrusive," she admitted softly. "To hunt someone who may have no idea of his parentage. To drag him into a past he didn't choose." Tommy touched her arm. "You aren't dragging him anywhere, Tuppence. You're uncovering the truth about a murder. If Mary died to protect this heir, we owe it to her." She nodded reluctantly. "You're right, but I wish the truth weren't always so tangled." Tommy offered a small smile. "If it weren't, we wouldn't be needed." They returned to the inn for a quiet meal, but quietness did not last. While stirring her tea absent-mindedly, Tuppence abruptly leaned forward. "Tommy, do you remember what Mrs. Ellery said about Mary noticing the birthmark?" "Yes, that she believed she'd seen it on someone." "Which means she was already close to identifying the hidden twin. Which means—" Tuppence paused, lowering her voice. "The person she confronted in that photograph could have been connected to the secret, either the twin himself or the person hiding him." Tommy nodded slowly, working the logic. "Someone warned her off, someone who knew she was getting too close, And that, Tuppence said, narrows our suspect list considerably. They had suspects with strong emotional reactions. Anthony Llewellyn, volatile, frightened, unpredictable. Colonel Hemsworth, evasive, hiding something old, Mrs. Maher. Fanshawe, fiercely protective of the past. Miss Pierce, panicked, terrified of the photograph. Any of them could have been involved in hiding the twin, or benefiting from the deception. Still, one piece was missing. Who was the heir? After dinner, Tuppence insisted they revisit the school. Quiet now, children long gone. The caretaker let them in, complaining mildly about late hours, but too polite to refuse. Tuppence wandered the corridors, studying photographs on the walls, class photos from decades past. Tommy followed, watching her eyes scan each group for patterns, clues, facial similarities to Anthony Llewellyn. Then Tuppence stopped suddenly. A class portrait from nearly 20 years ago showed a group of teenagers posed stiffly. Among them, a boy stood slightly apart. His hair was similar to Anthony's, his jawline too, not identical, but the kind of familial resemblance that lingered in bloodlines. "Tommy," she whispered, "look at him." Tommy leaned close. Resemblance is possible, but not definitive. "Unless he's also left-handed," Tuppence murmured. Beneath the portrait was a neat list of names. One in particular jumped out. Calder Robert. "Mr. Calder," Tommy said. "The assistant teacher." "And look," Tuppence said, pointing at the boy's arm. "His left sleeve is slightly rolled back, barely, but there, a faint smudge. Not clear, not certain, but something, a possibility, a spark." Tuppence exhaled. "We will speak to him tomorrow." Tommy nodded. "Carefully. If he is the heir, he may have no idea, and if someone tried to hide him, someone may still be watching." Tuppence shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of the truth inching closer. "Tommy," she said softly, "this could change someone's entire life." "Yes," Tommy murmured, "but it might save it too." They stepped out of the school into the soft evening air. The village seemed unusually quiet, as though holding its breath. Behind them, inside the school corridor, the photograph of young Robert Calder looked back silently, its secrets waiting, patient as time. The summons arrived in the form of a frantic knock. Tommy was mid-sentence, reading aloud a line from Mary Jordan's notebook. When Tuppence opened the door of the inn to find Mrs. Childers, the housekeeper of Blackthorn Estate, pale and wide-eyed. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, please, he's asking for you. Mr. Anthony, he says he must speak with you at once." She wrung her hands violently. "He hasn't slept. He's agitated." Tuppence slipped her coat on with the efficiency of a soldier preparing for battle. "Lead the way." As they followed Mrs. Childers down the winding path to the estate, Tommy murmured, "He chose now to summon us, after we uncovered Mary's notebook." "Or," Tuppence replied softly, "someone pushed him toward us." Anthony Llewellyn awaited them in the dim drawing-room, standing near the cold fireplace, as though the embers of the last 30 years were still burning beneath his feet. His hands trembled, his eyes flickered wildly, unable to settle. "You came," he said, as though amazed by their obedience. "We thought it best," Tommy replied. Anthony's gaze snapped to him. "You're digging into things that should stay buried. I know you found something. I know you're asking questions. People talk in this village, you know." Tuppence approached carefully. "You sent for us, Mr. Llewellyn. What is it you wanted to say?" His throat bobbed. I need to explain." He paced in a jerky, disordered way, passing beneath portraits of ancestors who looked no kinder than he felt. "I know what people say. That Mary was kind, decent, that she cared for me." His voice rose sharply. "She didn't." Tuppence remained calm. "Tell us what you believe happened." Anthony dragged in a shaking breath. "She tried to turn the house against me. She whispered things to the cook, the gardener, even to my mother, said I was troubled, that I was dangerous." His breath grew uneven. "She lied about me." "Lied?" Tommy asked gently. Anthony's fingers curled against his palms. "Yes, she told them I needed help, doctors, that I was unwell. They believed her because she was clever, and clever people lie beautifully." Tuppence's eyes softened. "And did she lie?" Anthony faltered. For the first time since they'd entered the room, he seemed less furious and more lost, like a child woken from a nightmare with no memory of falling asleep. "I don't know," he admitted hoarsely. "I don't remember that year clearly. Sometimes I think she frightened me. Other times I feel as though she tried to protect me." His voice cracked. "I don't know anymore." Tuppence exchanged a quiet glance with Tommy. This was no hardened killer with a rehearsed speech. This was a man fractured by memory, or by the deliberate removal of it. "What do you remember of Mary Jordan's last days?" Tuppence asked. Anthony's face twisted. "I remember shouting. I remember her saying something about another child. She said the house had 2 sons and only 1 name on the will." His voice lowered to a whisper. "But that's nonsense. I was the only child." "Were you?" Tuppence asked quietly. Anthony recoiled. "Yes," he snapped. Then softer. "At least, I think so." Tommy stepped forward. "Mary Jordan was asking questions. She confronted people. We've seen the photograph." Anthony flinched violently, his breath stuttering. "Don't show me that photograph. I don't want to see it. I don't want to think about her. She made everything worse." "Did you hate her?" Tuppence asked. "Yes," he cried. "I hated her. I hated how she looked at me, as if she knew something about me that I didn't." He staggered back, hitting the edge of the mantel with a thud. "But I didn't kill her. I didn't. His voice broke. The denial sounded genuine. "Anthony," Tuppence said softly, "why did you ask to see us?" His breathing steadied, just barely. "Because you're stirring things up. And part of me wants you to. I want to know what Mary knew." He rubbed his temples violently. "But I don't want the consequences." "What consequences?" Tommy asked. Anthony hesitated. Then he whispered, "If the truth comes out, everything changes." Tuppence stepped closer. "Anthony, what happened to your medical records from that time?" He blinked in surprise. "How do you—" He stopped. "They were destroyed. My mother burned them after she fell ill. Said they were not for anyone's eyes but hers. She was always secretive." Tuppence lifted a brow. Destroyed records, a governess who died suddenly, a dismissed footman, a frightened child, and a village determined to forget. Anthony began trembling again. "You think I had something to do with it? I can see it in your eyes." "No," Tuppence said gently. "I think you were a victim of that year, not the villain." His face went still, then rage flooded back in a sudden swell. "Stop looking at me like that," he shouted. "Stop pretending you understand anything. You don't. You know too much already." He lunged forward. Tommy stepped between them instantly. "Anthony, control yourself." For a moment it seemed Anthony might strike out. His fist tightened. His breath roared like a bellows, then the rage collapsed. Anthony sagged into the nearest chair, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know what happened," he whispered. "I don't remember her death. I don't remember the shouting. I don't remember anything except being told I was ill. They sent me away for weeks. When I came back, Mary was gone." Tuppence's voice was soft as a sigh. "Who told you were ill?" "My mother." His voice was flat. "She said I had night terrors and fevers, but I don't remember. Not a moment of it." "And your mother kept those records locked away," Tommy murmured. "No doctor ever confirmed them?" Anthony shook his head. No one spoke of it again. Silence stretched. Then Anthony whispered, "I think someone did something to my memories." Tuppence felt a chill, not supernatural but psychological, a child controlled, a child silenced. Tommy asked quietly, "What do you want from us, Anthony?" Anthony's eyes lifted, pale, haunted, desperate. "I want you to find the truth," he whispered, "but I don't want it to be real." They were preparing to leave, the tension in the room finally thinning, when it happened. A sharp, violent crack shattered the air. Tommy spun just in time to see the glass of the tall side window splinter inward, shards scattering across the carpet like thrown knives. Tuppence gasped and ducked. Anthony leapt to his feet, pale as a ghost. Tommy rushed to the broken window. A small, heavy stone lay among the shards, wrapped in brown paper. Tuppence unfurled it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. Old typewriter. The same worn O, the same era. 3 words. Leave Now. Stop. Tuppence felt her pulse tighten. Tommy, someone is watching us. Not just watching, he murmured. Intercepting, warning, or threatening. Anthony staggered back. You see? He whispered, terrified. You see? Someone doesn't want you here. Someone doesn't want the past touched. Tuppence scanned the trees beyond the shattered window. Shadows hovered, leaves rustled, but whoever had thrown the stone was gone. Tommy turned to Anthony. Does anyone else have keys to the gate? Grounds too accessible? Too many, Anthony muttered. Old staff, villagers with past ties, people from decades ago who take shortcuts across the grounds. Tuppence's voice was very calm. Anthony, do you know who would do this? Anthony shook his head, but panic flickered across his eyes. Panic that suggested he suspected someone. Tuppence studied him carefully. Whoever wants us gone wanted Mary gone too. Anthony's voice was little more than a breath. Then you're in danger. We've been in worse, Tuppence said lightly. Tommy gave her a pointed look. Have we? She ignored him. Anthony's chair scraped sharply as he backed away. You should leave Sutton, Chancellor, immediately. The village protects its own. Protects its secrets, you mean? Tuppence replied. Anthony shut his eyes. Secrets can kill. Tommy placed the stone on the table. Or warn. Whoever threw this might be trying to stop the killer from striking again. Tuppence looked at the shattered glass, the old typed letters, the trembling man before them. Either way, she murmured, we're closer than they want us to be. As they stepped out of the estate into the cool evening, Tommy whispered, that stone wasn't a threat. No, Tuppence agreed, eyes dark with calculation. It was a warning from someone who knows exactly what happened to Mary Jordan. She paused, her gaze drifting back to the looming manor. And they're getting desperate. Tuppence had just finished pinning up the final sheet of notes on the in-room wall. Names, arrows, timelines, all stitched together in her unmistakably theatrical handwriting, when she heard the softest possible knock. Not timid, not nervous. Careful. Tommy glanced up. Expecting anyone? No, which means it's either very good or very bad. Tuppence crossed the room and opened the door a cautious inch. Standing in the corridor was Mr. Calder, shirt sleeves rumpled, spectacles slightly askew, expression hovering somewhere between guilt and dread. Mrs. Carter, he whispered, please, may I speak with you? It's important. Tuppence's instincts fired instantly. Calder had always seemed quiet, polite, unassuming, traits that made him easy to overlook. But now his eyes held the unmistakable shimmer of someone carrying a secret he could no longer bear alone. Of course, Tuppence said, ushering him inside. Tommy, put the kettle on. Calder stepped in, glancing uneasily at the wall of notes. You've been digging, he murmured. I knew you were. I could tell. People started getting nervous. People? Tommy asked. Calder swallowed. Those who remember. Those who want everything kept quiet. Tuppence gestured for him to sit. Mr. Calder, what brought you here tonight? Calder sat, then immediately stood again, hands shaking. He seemed unable to find the proper position for his own limbs. I saw you at the school, he said, looking at the photographs, and I recognized the look on your face. You had found the class picture, my picture. Tuppence's eyes flickered. You believe we connected you to something? Yes, Calder breathed, and we should talk before someone else does. He slowly removed his spectacles and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I think Mary Jordan died because of me. Tuppence stilled. Tommy set down the kettle. Explain, Tuppence said quietly. Calder inhaled. I grew up here, fostered by the Ketterings, kind, older couple, lived near the church. They told me I arrived on their doorstep as an infant. My timeline was always vague, always slightly wrong, always just a bit off. He began pacing, nervous energy spilling out of him. But I never questioned it. I was happy enough, until the whispers began. Children can sense things, adults staring too long, asking odd questions, noticing my features. Calder stopped. His hands trembled as he picked up a pencil from the table, then switched it immediately to his left hand. Tuppence caught the gesture. She met Tommy's eyes. Oh, she whispered. Calder saw the recognition and flinched. Yes, I'm left-handed. Always have been. "And your arm?" Tuppence asked gently. Calder hesitated only a moment, then rolled up his sleeve. There, faint against his skin, as though time had tried to erase it but never quite succeeded, was a small, curved blemish, a comma-shaped birthmark. Tuppence felt her heart tighten. She pressed a hand to her mouth. "Mary Jordan described this," she whispered. "The midwife confirmed it. You are the other child." Calder sank into the chair as though he had been unmasked before a firing squad. "I thought so. I suspected. But until you came, I didn't dare believe it." His voice faltered. "But I don't want anything from Sutton Chancellor. Not money, not status. I just want to know who I am." Tuppence reached out, placing a steadying hand on his arm. "Tell us everything you remember." Calder nodded slowly. "Mary Jordan visited us, only a few times. I was very young, 2, maybe 3, but I remember her face, soft eyes, a gentle smile." His voice took on a fragile reverence. "She would bring small toys, wooden animals, a blue spinning top, and coins for my foster parents. She would whisper to them. I didn't understand the words, but as I grew older, the whispers became warnings." "Warnings?" Tommy asked. Calder nodded. "She told them I must never return to the estate, never ask about my parentage, never seek a claim." "Because she was trying to protect you," Tuppence said softly. "She knew the Llewellyn matriarch wanted you erased." Calder swallowed. "Mary said she had made a terrible discovery, that someone would come for me if they discovered I was still in the village." Tuppence's heartbeat drummed in her chest. "Someone powerful." "Someone ruthless," Calder corrected. Tommy leaned forward. "The day Mary Jordan died, what do you remember about that time?" Calder shook his head. "Nothing specific, only that after she died we moved away for a few years. My foster parents said it was to start fresh. When we returned, everyone acted startled. Some looked guilty, others avoided me entirely." "Because the truth still hid under the surface," Tuppence murmured. Calder nodded. "Yes, and now that you've started asking questions, they're frightened again." He paused, his gaze sweeping toward the window. "And I think someone is watching you." Tuppence's spine straightened. "Explain." Calder turned to Tommy. "That man, the tall man, you noticed him too, didn't you? Following you near the shop, standing behind the yew hedge when you left the school yesterday." Tommy froze. "You saw him?" "Yes. Outdated military coat, broad shoulders, walks with a slight limp." "Peter Lacey," Tuppence whispered. Calder nodded. "That's who people say he looks like, though he'd be much older now." "Unless he returned," Tommy murmured, "or someone connected to him did." Calder's voice softened. "Whoever he is, he's not the only one watching. People in the village are nervous. They know what happened to Mary, and they know that if the truth comes out, it implicates them too." "Not necessarily in murder," Tuppence said, "but certainly in complicity." Calder's hands clenched. "They want me silent, and they want you gone." Tommy's tone was calm. "We won't leave." "No," Tuppence said firmly, "not when we're finally close." Calder exhaled, relief and fear mingling in his expression. "Then you must protect yourself, because whoever hid my existence, they won't let you reveal it." Tuppence picked up Mary's notebook from the table, flipping to the final page. "The truth lies with the one who was never meant to inherit." She looked into Calder's eyes. "That's you." He looked down. "I never asked for it." "Yes," Tuppence said gently, "but Mary died because she believed the truth mattered more than danger. And now, the same danger surrounds you." He stared at them, two strangers who had unraveled a life of lies in less than a week, with a mixture of gratitude and terror. "What do I do?" he whispered. Tommy answered. "You stay where people can see you, public places. You're safer if you're visible, and you don't walk anywhere alone." Calder nodded. "I can manage that." But Tuppence felt unease tightening inside her. "There's something else," she said softly. "Mary visited you in secret. Someone must have known. Someone must have seen her." Calder's face shifted. "There was an argument at the churchyard. I was too young to remember clearly, but my foster mother once mentioned it. She said Mary confronted someone who threatened her." "Who?" Tuppence pressed. Calder shook his head. "She refused to say." Tuppence paced. So Mary discovered the twin. She protected him. She visited him. But then she confronted someone, and that confrontation led to her death. Tommy's voice was low, which means the killer wasn't acting out of passion or impulse. No, Tuppence said. It was purposeful, calculated. Calder swallowed. And they might try again. Tuppence reached for him, steady and certain. Not while we're here. A quiet knock sounded at the door. All three froze. Tuppence gestured for silence. Tommy moved to the door, opening it just a sliver. The corridor was empty, but at his feet lay a folded sheet of paper. Typed. Tuppence lifted it, heart pounding. Another brief message. He knows. Move him. Tonight. Stop. Tommy's jaw tightened. Someone wants Calder out of the village. Tuppence's voice was a whisper of steel. No. Someone wants him out of the way. Calder's face paled. This is because I came to you. No, Tuppence said. This is because the truth has finally become dangerous. She straightened. We must hide you, she said. Somewhere unexpected. Somewhere no villager would think to look. Tommy nodded. And then we trace the sender. Whoever typed these warnings is involved, either protecting you or controlling you. Calder's voice wavered. If Mary died trying to save me, I don't want her death to be repeated. Tuppence's eyes briefly softened with something like sorrow. Then we'll finish what she began. She folded the typed warning, set it beside the first stone-wrapped note, and exhaled. Tommy, she said, we're no longer solving a cold case. No, he replied. We're preventing a fresh murder. Tuppence looked at Calder, pale, trembling, clutching the sleeve that hid the birthmark that had changed his entire life. The truth has risen, she murmured, and someone will kill to bury it again. Tuppence had seen village fates go wrong, trestle tables collapsing, vicars losing raffles, small children escaping with entire jars of sweets, but she had never seen a fate teeter quite so dangerously on the edge of mayhem. The storm hadn't been forecast. It arrived not with thunder, but with a sudden, violent wind that tore through Sutton Chancellor's Green like an unruly spectator. Bunting flapped, paper decorations spun wildly, and the gramophone crackled as though objecting to the entire affair. But Tuppence barely noticed the chaos, because every suspect was here. Colonel Hemsworth, stiff-backed and irritable, stood beneath a gazebo, whispering to Mrs. Fanshawe with a ferocity far too intense for conversations about cake judging. Mrs. Fanshawe, resplendent in her pearls and pastel dress, kept darting glances around the green as though expecting an attack. Anthony Llewellyn hovered near the punch table, pacing circles with wild eyes, stopping anyone who would listen to hiss frantic accusations. She's here, he muttered. I can feel her. Mary Jordan, she's watching me. The gardener Copley lingered near the back gate, his hands clenched around a trowel as though it were a talisman or a weapon. He kept looking over his shoulder, and in the far corner near the stalls where wind kept knocking over small displays, Tommy saw him. The tall man in the soldier's coat, the same broad shoulders, the same limp, the same unmistakable silhouette. Tommy's pulse sharpened. Tuppence, he murmured, I've found our ghost. She followed his gaze and inhaled. Then today, she said softly, the past finally speaks. Tommy wasted no time. He wove through the crowd, catching the sleeve of the man just as he turned to slip behind the coconut shy. Peter Lacey? Tommy said quietly. The man froze. Slowly he turned, a gaunt, weather-beaten face lined deeply, but with eyes that still held the clarity of a man who had never stopped running from the past. You know my name, he murmured hoarsely. Tommy nodded. And you've been following us. Lacey swallowed. I had to see what you knew. Had to see what you were going to uncover. Tommy gestured toward a quieter corner, half-sheltered by the village hall. Talk to me, before someone else decides to finish what they started. Lacey hesitated, but then nodded and followed. When they were out of the wind, Tommy asked, You were dismissed from Blackthorn Estate just before Mary Jordan died. Yes. Lacey's jaw tightened. Because she trusted me. Because she confided in me. And because the mistress, God rest her wicked soul, knew I would not keep silent. What did Mary discover? Lacey's voice cracked. The child, the twin. She knew the mistress had sent him away, and she knew that the child was still nearby. And you believed her? I saw the birth, Lacey murmured. I knew there were 2 boys. The mistress claimed one was stillborn, but Mary told me she heard him crying when they carried him away. Tommy exhaled slowly. And Mary confronted the mistress? Yes. She stormed into the parlour one evening, said what the mistress had done was unforgivable, said one day it would come out, inheritance, bloodlines, all of it. And the mistress dismissed you? Oh yes, Lacey breathed. Said Mary had corrupted me, said I'd begun to believe her lies, told me to get out before she called the constable. Tommy leaned in. And the night Mary died? Lacey closed his eyes. I came back. I knew she was in danger. I had to warn her, but I was too late. Tell me everything, Tommy murmured. Lacey's hands shook. I saw someone leaving the schoolroom. Small, stocky, limping slightly. His eyes sharpened. Not Anthony. Anthony was a tall boy. Awkward, yes, but tall. This person was shorter and moved with purpose. Tommy's heartbeat thudded. And Mary? When I reached her, she was already gone. Lacey's voice dropped to a whisper. But someone had moved her, arranged her, as if to stage a death by illness. Tommy felt a chill. And you told no one? Lacey let out a broken laugh. Tell the police that the mistress killed the governess. They'd have locked me up on the spot, or worse. So you vanished, Tommy said. Yes, and I've been watching ever since, hoping someone would finally see what Mary saw. He looked up, tears bright in his eyes. She didn't deserve to die. She was trying to protect that child. Tommy placed a steady hand on Lacey's arm. We found him. He's alive. Lacey's breath hitched. Thank God. But he's in danger now, Tommy warned. Someone knows we're close. A sharp gust rattled the fate tents. A shriek of laughter or fear echoed from the green. The chaos added tension to the air, almost making the village itself feel complicit. Lacey's voice hardened. Then we finish this. Today. Tommy nodded. Meanwhile, Tuppence had drifted deliberately toward Colonel Hemsworth and Mrs. Fanshawe, who were still whispering with a level of intensity inappropriate for sponge cake judging. She stepped up to them with a bright smile. Lovely day for a fete. Mrs. Fanshawe flinched. Colonel Hemsworth straightened as though caught stealing silver. Mrs. Carter, he said cautiously, enjoying yourself? Immensely, Tuppence said. And you? Mrs. Fanshawe's smile was taut. We were just discussing the raffle. Were you? Because it rather looked like a conversation about someone's imminent ruin. Mrs. Fanshawe's eyes widened. Good heavens, what an imagination. Imagination is my favourite tool, Tuppence replied, and I find it flares when people whisper like criminals. Colonel Hemsworth stiffened. Now see here. But Tuppence's attention flicked downward. Mrs. Fanshawe's left skirt hem had caught in her stocking. As she tugged it free, her dress pulled just enough to reveal something beneath the softness of silk. A brace, a metal and leather knee brace. Her left knee, a brace that would cause a limp, a slight, unmistakable limp. Tuppence inhaled sharply. Oh my. Mrs. Fanshawe froze. Colonel Hemsworth's eyes darted to the brace, then to Tuppence, and Tuppence knew, absolutely knew, that she had seen something she was not meant to see. She covered it with a bright smile. Terrible wind today, isn't it? So hard on fragile joints. Mrs. Fanshawe's expression flickered. Fear first, then something else. Calculation. Cold, swift calculation. She smiled back, brittle as glass. Yes, quite. Tuppence's heart pounded. She backed away as though admiring a jam stall, slipping into the crowd with practiced ease. She found Tommy returning from the hall. His expression told her everything. You found him, she said. Yes, and we have confirmation. Mary confronted the mistress, Lacey tried to protect her, and someone with a limp left the schoolroom after Mary's death. Tuppence nodded grimly. Then we have our solution. Mrs. Fanshawe, Tommy said quietly. She hid it well, Tuppence agreed, but today she couldn't hide any more. The fate descended into further disorder when Anthony began shouting near the tombola stall. She's here, he cried, grabbing Stranger's arms. Mary Jordan! She's walking the grounds! Tuppence pushed through the crowd toward him. Anthony was trembling violently, pointing toward the back hedge. "Look, I saw her dress, her face." Tuppence rested a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Anthony, darling, that's not—" But Tommy stepped beside her, eyes narrowed. "She saw someone," he murmured. "Someone watching him, watching us." They both scanned the hedge. A shadow slipped away. Not Mrs. Fanshawe. Too tall, not Lacey. Too light-footed, not Copley. Too quick. Someone else. Someone they hadn't yet accounted for. "Tommy," Tuppence said softly, "there are more pieces on the board than we realized." "True," Tommy said, "but Fanshawe is the one with the limp." "And calculation," Tuppence added. "Don't forget calculation." Anthony sagged against the table. "She doesn't forgive," he whispered. "She doesn't let things die." Tommy guided him to a bench. "Who, Anthony? Who doesn't forgive?" He stared blankly. "My mother's friends. Her circle. They protected her secrets. They still do." Tuppence stiffened. "Mrs. Fanshawe belonged to that circle." "Yes," Anthony whispered. "She was always there, whispering in my mother's ear." Tommy exchanged a look with Tuppence. Then Mary's death was not matriarchal rage alone. It was assisted, approved, encouraged. "And Mrs. Fanshawe was the enforcer," Tuppence finished. She looked back toward the cake stall where Mrs. Fanshawe stood smiling benignly at villagers, her calm, gracious mask once again securely in place. But Tuppence now saw everything beneath that mask, the limp, the calculation, the fear only of exposure, never of guilt. The fate roared around them, children laughing, wind whipping, tent poles rattling. But a quiet, crucial truth had crystallized. Mrs. Fanshawe had killed Mary Jordan, not to protect Anthony, not to protect the mistress, but to protect the secret that kept the village and its power structures frozen in false history. Tuppence took a slow breath. "Tommy, tonight the past came back." "And the killer," Tommy said, "is finally within reach." Tuppence had faced liars before, silky ones, desperate ones, charming ones, but none quite like Mrs. Evelyn Fanshawe, who sat across from her in the small reading room of the village hall with the serene composure of a woman slicing cake rather than history. The fate's collapse had driven villagers indoors, and the hall now held only 3 people: Tuppence, Tommy, and Mrs. Fanshawe herself, who folded her gloves with genteel precision as if preparing for afternoon tea rather than interrogation. "You wish to speak to me," Mrs. Fanshawe said smoothly. "I cannot imagine why, though I do hope it will be brief. This weather is dreadful for my joints." Tuppence met her gaze with unblinking calm. "We know you were in the schoolroom the night Mary Jordan died." Mrs. Fanshawe did not flinch. "My dear, I have been in many rooms over the past 40 years. You will need to be more specific." Tommy laid Mary Jordan's notebook on the table. Fanshawe's eyes darted to it, just a flicker, and then she resumed her composure. But the flicker was enough. "The truth," Tuppence said softly, "is no longer buried, and you know it." Fanshawe smoothed her skirt. "Truth is such a flexible thing, Mrs. Carter. It bends with the teller." "Not this time," Tuppence replied. "This time it's been found." Tuppence leaned forward, her voice calm, analytical. "Mary Jordan discovered the existence of the hidden twin, the true heir. The matriarch feared a scandal. She confided in you, her cousin, you, who stood to lose your comfortable position if the estate changed hands." "A comfortable position?" Fanshawe laughed lightly. "My dear, I have worked tirelessly for this village." "And controlled it," Tuppence said quietly. "Controlled Anthony, controlled the narrative, controlled the erasure." Fanshawe's smile froze, but she said nothing. Tommy continued. "Mary confronted your cousin about the twins. She warned her she intended to expose the truth. The matriarch panicked. You agreed something had to be done." Fanshawe's eyes narrowed. "You speak with such confidence for someone who wasn't there." "But Peter Lacey was," Tommy replied. "He returned tonight. He saw someone leaving the schoolroom the night Mary died. Someone shorter than Anthony, someone with a limp." A tiny crack formed in Fanshawe's expression, small but unmistakable. "Mrs. Fanshawe," Tuppence said softly, "lift your skirt hem." Fanshawe went rigid. "I beg your pardon?" "You're wearing a brace, the left knee. I saw it today when the wind pulled your skirt." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Fanshawe did not deny it. Tuppence continued in a measured voice, building the picture piece by piece. Mary Jordan didn't confront Anthony. She confronted you. She went to the schoolroom to gather her notes, to plan her next move. You followed her. Fanshawe's eyes chilled to polished glass. You argued, Tuppence said. You told her she didn't understand the implications. She told you the hidden child deserved his inheritance. You insisted she drop the matter. She refused. Tommy's tone was steady. It wasn't premeditated, not entirely, but fear does strange things. You struck her, harder than you intended. She fell. Fanshawe swallowed, the first true break in her mask. You found the perfect tool, Tuppence said. A piece of firewood from the hearth, small enough to look accidental, heavy enough to kill. Fanshawe closed her eyes. Tuppence pressed on. She died instantly. You panicked, but then you realized this was an opportunity, a clean way to protect the estate, to protect Anthony's future, to protect yourself. Fanshawe's hands tightened around her gloves until the knuckles blanched. You staged the body, Tommy said, moved her so it looked like illness. You called the matriarch. Together, you decided how to conceal the truth. Still no denial. Tuppence drew out the next thread. You cut the parish records, she said. Not the matriarch. You. You slipped into the parish office, removed the relevant pages from the record book, and burned them. Fanshawe inhaled sharply. You intercepted Peter Lacey's telegraph, Tommy added. Told the telegraph girl the message was incorrect and must be discarded. You paid for her silence. Fanshawe lifted her chin. I protect this village from unnecessary scandal. Tuppence ignored the justification. You coached Anthony as a child, told him Mary Jordan frightened him, told him she was dangerous, told him she lied. You shaped his memory from the moment he returned from the illness he never had. Fanshawe's eyes gleamed coldly. Children are malleable, and Anthony was imaginative. You made him doubt himself, Tommy said. Even now he believes Mary tormented him, but he remembers nothing of that year because you made certain he didn't. Fanshawe gave a small shrug. Children forget. It is natural. Tuppence's voice hardened. It is manipulation. Tuppence continued. You also fired the warning shot into the estate window, not to kill, to scare us away. Fanshawe folded her gloves precisely. It is my duty to maintain the peace. By committing attempted intimidation, Tommy asked. Fanshawe gave a faint smile. A stone through glass is hardly murder. No, Tuppence said softly. But Mary Jordan's death is. Fanshawe looked away. The hall was silent save for the tapping of the wind outside. Fanshawe finally spoke. Her voice was low but not shaky, detached, almost serene. You cannot imagine what chaos would have followed the truth. The Llewellyn heir, lost, the estate illegitimate, the matriarch accused of theft, the village divided. I preserved order. You preserved yourself, Tuppence said. Fanshawe's jaw tightened. I preserved everything that mattered. Tommy stepped closer. Mary Jordan mattered. Fanshawe's lashes lowered. She was meddlesome. She threatened stability. She threatened Anthony's inheritance. She threatened the matriarch's legacy. She threatened my standing. Tuppence leaned in. And Calder? The true heir? What did he threaten? Fanshawe's eyes gleamed with steely indifference. Nothing, because no one knew he existed. Mary knew, Tuppence replied, and so did you. Fanshawe didn't speak. And now, Tuppence said softly, the truth is no longer yours to control. Mrs. Fanshawe straightened as though preparing for applause. Let me be clear, she said with icy calm. I did what was required. I saved this village from ruination. I saved Anthony from a life of shame. I saved the Llewellyn name. And Mary, Tuppence whispered. Fanshawe's veneer shook. I saved, she said, everyone who mattered. Except the innocent, Tommy said. Fanshawe's restraint snapped. Mary would have destroyed us. The words tore from her like a long-suppressed scream. It hung in the air, raw and sharp. For the first time, Mrs. Fanshawe seemed older, fragile, haunted, diminished by the truth she'd been carrying like a stone in her chest. Mary Jordan, she whispered, knew too much, and she would not stop. Tuppence nodded slowly. So you did. Fanshawe swallowed. I ended one life to save dozens from ruin. Tommy's voice was quiet but firm. You ended the wrong one. The door creaked. Anthony Llewellyn stood there, hollow-eyed, shaken, as though sleepwalking into a nightmare half-remembered. He had overheard everything. "Mrs. Fanshawe," he said weakly, "is it true? You tried to protect me?" Fanshawe's face lit with the glow of twisted pride. "Yes, my dear boy. Everything I did was for you." Anthony stepped forward, then back, as if burned. "You killed her. You killed the only person who ever tried to help me." Fanshawe's expression darkened. "Help you?" Mary Jordan sought to destroy your childhood. Anthony shook his head violently. "No, you destroyed it. You filled my mind with lies. You drowned my memories." Tuppence stepped between them. "Anthony, you're safe. She can't manipulate you anymore." Anthony's voice trembled. "I never wanted any of this." Fanshawe's tone turned cutting. "You would not understand, Anthony. You were too young, too fragile. I protected you from the truth." Anthony's laugh was hollow. "You protected your position." The weight of his words settled heavily. Two constables entered quietly, summoned earlier by Tommy. Their boots echoed against the wooden floor. "Mrs. Fanshawe," the elder constable said formally, "we must ask you to accompany us to the station." Fanshawe rose gracefully, as if preparing to attend a luncheon. "I suppose this is inevitable." Tuppence watched her closely. No fear, no remorse, only exhausted pride. As she passed, Fanshawe paused beside Tuppence and murmured, "I saved this village." Tuppence replied softly, "No, Mary Jordan saved it. You only delayed the truth." Fanshawe stiffened, then allowed herself to be escorted out. The hall fell still. Anthony sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Tommy placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "The lies are over now." Anthony's voice cracked. "I don't know who I am without them." Tuppence knelt beside him. "That means you finally get to decide." The door opened again, this time with a faint creak, and Robert Calder stepped inside. His face was pale, but resolute. "I heard," he said softly, "all of it." Anthony lifted his head, eyes rimmed with shock and shame. Calder approached slowly. "I don't want the estate, or the title, or the scandal. I never did." Anthony stared. "But you're the rightful heir." "No," Calder said gently. "I'm a schoolteacher, that's who I am." Tommy nodded approvingly. Calder continued, "Let the estate stay with Anthony. It's his home, his memory, his life. Mine is somewhere else." Tuppence's eyes softened. "That is your choice, and it is generous." Calder shook his head. "It is simply peace." He turned to go, but paused. "Mary Jordan died for the truth," he said quietly. "And thanks to you, she is finally vindicated." Tuppence felt her throat tighten. "She is." Calder nodded once, then slipped away into the dim corridor, his silhouette steady, unburdened at last. Anthony sat in silence. Then he whispered, "I owe Calder an apology." "You owe yourself forgiveness," Tuppence said gently. "You were a child trapped in another's narrative." Anthony swallowed. "What do I do now?" Tommy offered a small, warm smile. "You build your own story." Tuppence added, "And remember Mary Jordan with truth, not fear." Outside, the storm began to pass. The village, shaken to its core, would soon wake to scandal, but also freedom. The truth, once unearthly and buried, now lay bare. And Mary Jordan, silenced for 40 years, had finally been heard. Tommy Beresford stood by the village post office counter, pen poised, as if the letter he was about to send required the steadiness of a surgeon's hand. Tuppence watched him from the doorway, arms folded, expression approving but amused. "You look," she observed, "as though you're signing a treaty." Tommy exhaled. "It feels like one. This case, it isn't like the others." "No," Tuppence said quietly, because Mary Jordan had no one left to speak for her. She tapped the sealed packet resting between them, Mary Jordan's notebook carefully tied with string, and Tuppence's own letter addressed to the county archive. "Now she does." Tommy lifted the packet. "Ready?" Tuppence nodded. "Post it." He slid it into the outgoing mail slot. It landed with a soft thud, uneventful but final. That sound marked the end of a 40-year silence. Tuppence gave a long, slow breath. There, a life restored. That afternoon they walked to Blackthorn Estate, where Anthony Llewellyn waited in the drawing room like a man piecing together a dismantled identity. His usually smooth hair hung slightly dishevelled. He looked younger, as if grief and relief had peeled years off his face. "Tuppence, Mr. Beresford." He rose uncertainly. "I don't know where to begin." "Begin," Tuppence said gently, "with how you feel." Anthony gave a helpless laugh. "I feel as though I've lived someone else's life. Mrs. Fanshawe told me who I was, what I remembered, what I feared, and I believed all of it. I've been angry for years without knowing why." Tommy nodded. "That anger wasn't yours. It was planted." Anthony swallowed, eyes shining. "And Mary Jordan? I believed because Fanshawe insisted that she frightened me as a child, that she lied, that she tried to turn people against me." His voice cracked. "She was trying to protect me." "You were a child held hostage by a narrative," Tuppence said, moving closer. "That would damage anyone, but you can heal from it." "Heal," Anthony repeated as though tasting the word. "Is that possible?" Tuppence nodded. "Entirely. You must speak to someone trained to help you separate your own memories from the ones you were fed." Anthony stared down at his hands. "And Calder? I owe him an apology so large I don't know where to start." "You start," Tommy said, "by simply telling him the truth." "And if he doesn't want anything to do with me," Anthony whispered. "Then you let him decide that on his own terms," Tuppence replied. Anthony nodded slowly. "Thank you for uncovering everything. I would never have known." "That," Tuppence said softly, "is why we came." The Beresfords found Calder outside the school, leaning against the low stone wall as children skipped past on their way home. The early evening sun slanted across the playground, giving the moment an ordinary peacefulness that contrasted sharply with the weight of the truth he carried. He straightened when he saw them. "I heard the arrest went smoothly." "As smoothly as such things can," Tommy said. Calder nodded. "Good." He looked tired but tranquil, a man who had been burdened with a truth he never asked for, and now, unexpectedly, had found release. "I wanted to thank you both," he said quietly, "not for proving anything about inheritance, that doesn't matter to me, but for proving Mary Jordan wasn't mad or malicious. She cared, even when no one else did." Tuppence gave him a small, warm smile. "She cared very much, enough to risk everything." Calder looked away, blinking quickly. "I've been thinking, perhaps I should move. A fresh town, fresh school, but I'm not sure." "You should do whatever gives you peace," Tommy said. "But before you decide, there's something we've arranged." Tuppence handed him a folded document. Calder hesitated. "What's this?" "Mary set aside a small trust," Tuppence explained, "for her special pupil, though no one ever knew who she meant. The solicitor found the paper among old estate holdings. She clearly meant it for you." Calder opened the document and read the first few lines. The breath went out of him like air from a punctured bellows. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Tuppence replied, "but you deserve it." Calder folded the document and pressed it to his chest. "Thank you." Tommy shook his hand firmly. "Take care of yourself." Calder nodded. "And you." As he walked away, Tuppence watched him with a soft melancholy. "He'll be all right." "Yes," Tommy said. "He has a life he built himself. Mary would be proud." The Beresfords took a final walk through Sutton Chancellor before packing. Their path, as if guided by invisible memory, led them back to the small old schoolhouse where Mary Jordan had once taught and where she had met her tragic end. Inside, the air was plain and undramatic. A faint chalk smell lingered. The rows of desks were clean and orderly. Sunlight settled across the floor like a patch of quiet forgiveness. No ghosts remained. Tuppence stepped forward until she reached the front of the room, where Mary's desk had stood for more than half a century. The wood, though polished anew since their last visit, bore the faintest scratches, signs of an ordinary life once lived fiercely. She rested her hand on the desk. "Mary," she whispered, "we didn't let them forget you." Tommy watched from the doorway, hat in hand. He knew better than to interrupt her private moment. After a long silence, Tuppence turned. "Let's go home." Tommy nodded. "London awaits." They walked out together, the schoolroom door clicking lightly shut behind them, final but peaceful. Back at their guest cottage, the Beresfords faced the inevitable challenge of packing. Tommy insisted on handling the luggage efficiently, a term which, in his hands, meant piling everything into one overburdened tower of suitcases, valises, and hat boxes. "Tuppence," he called from the hallway. "I believe I've mastered the physics of this situation." Tuppence, who had learned long ago that physics was not Tommy's strong suit, raised an eyebrow as he staggered into view. He carried all 4 bags stacked precariously in his arms, plus an umbrella sticking out of his pocket at a ridiculous angle. "Tommy," she said dryly, "you are a hopeless case." "Nonsense," he puffed, wobbling dangerously. "Perfectly manageable." The top suitcase slipped an inch. "Tommy," she warned. He straightened bravely. All part of the strategy. Another wobble. The umbrella fell. A hat box slid. Tuppence sighed, that affectionate, exasperated sigh reserved only for him, and stepped forward to rescue him before gravity completed its coup. "Darling," she said, removing 2 bags from his arms, "the next time you attempt strategy, please notify me first. It gives me time to prepare the first aid kit." Tommy laughed sheepishly. "Well, yes, perhaps this was optimistic." "You think?" He leaned down and kissed her cheek. "Wouldn't have it any other way." Tuppence responded with a warm smile. "Neither would I." Their taxi arrived with a rumble, the driver climbing out to load the now sensibly divided luggage. As he did, Tommy and Tuppence paused on the cottage path to take one last look at Sutton Chancellor. The village looked unremarkable. Stone houses, creeping ivy, a church spire etched against the sky. But beneath its tranquility lay a story finally brought to light, a wrong finally righted. Tuppence tucked her arm into Tommy's. "Do you realize, my sweet, that if not for that misdelivered letter, Mary Jordan's truth might have remained lost forever?" Tommy nodded. Amazing how the smallest mistake can reveal the largest secret. Tuppence considered this. Perhaps Mary intended it. One last nudge. Tommy chuckled. "Spiritual nudges aside, I'm simply relieved we solved it." "So am I," Tuppence said softly. "And glad it's over." They climbed into the taxi as the driver secured the final bag. The engine started, humming a farewell. The schoolhouse drifted past the window. The church porch where Calder had been found as a baby. The village green where gossip had once fluttered like dry leaves. And finally, the narrow lane leading out of Sutton Chancellor. Tuppence leaned her head lightly against Tommy's shoulder. "Home?" "Home," Tommy echoed. London received them with its familiar bustle, its charm of buses and clatter, its endless possibilities. But the Beresfords returned with something more, a renewed sense of purpose and an old ache laid to rest. Days later, Tuppence received a letter from Calder. "I have decided to stay in Sutton Chancellor," it read, "but I will not be the quiet shadow any more. I will live as myself. Mary Jordan gave me that chance, and you restored it. Thank you. R. Calder." Tuppence folded the letter thoughtfully. When Tommy found her holding it, she smiled. "He's found peace," Tommy nodded. "And Anthony?" "Already meeting with a specialist," Tuppence said. "He'll need time, but he'll come through it. He's stronger than he thinks." "And Mrs. Fanshawe?" Tuppence sighed. "A tragic waste of a life devoted to the wrong fear." "Some people," Tommy said, "cannot accept truth until it crushes them." Tuppence reached for his hand. "But Mary Jordan has her justice." "Yes," Tommy agreed. "She does." That evening, as the lamps glowed over their sitting room and the kettle whistled cheerily, Tuppence curled in her favourite chair with a book. Tommy attempted to set the tea tray without knocking anything over, a task requiring delicate precision. "You know," Tuppence said teasingly, "you're very good at solving murders." Tommy grinned. "And terrible at trays." "Quite." They shared a laugh. Light, relieved, home. Their adventures would continue, of course. They always did. But Mary Jordan's story had touched something deep in both of them, a reminder that truth was not merely found, but fought for. Tuppence raised her teacup in a small toast. To Mary Jordan. Tommy mirrored her gesture. To justice. They sipped. Outside, the city whispered its usual melody. Horns, footsteps, chatter. Ordinary life flowing on. Inside, the Beresfords sat together, warm and safe, knowing they had honoured a woman forgotten by time and restored a truth nearly lost forever. And for now, that was enough.